Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on how to get insights out of the GRESB portal. It's great to see so many of you already on the line. We're just starting a couple of minutes later just to make sure that everyone is attending who's registered. So it's good to see so many of you here. And it's a great time for us to be having this webinar because we have a fresh set of data in the portal. The 218 assessment data set is now fresh in the portal. So we're excited to give you some insight into how the GRESB portal works, some of the features, and how to get more out of it. My name is Claudia Gonella. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director here at GRESB. And I'm joined by Charles van Thiel, who's an associate with the real estate team. And Charles is going to run through the portal for us. We have a demo portal set up, and he'll run through the key features of that. And he's really well placed to do it. Charles has really been leading a lot of our insight into the 2018 data set. So really pleased that he can do this for us. We have some time at the end for questions and answers, but really please type in your questions really at any time as they come up, because if we see something that's sort of relevant to what we're covering in the portal, we'll stop and tackle the question as it comes in. So please don't hold on to your questions until the end, just keep them typing in, and we'll keep an eye on that question and answer panel. We're recording this webinar, and we'll make sure that all of you receive a link to the recording in the email that will follow. So to start with, just a little bit of context. This webinar is for GRESB Investor Members, and we have three types of investors. We have listed real estate investor members, we have non-listed real estate investor members, and we also have infrastructure investor members. Now, no doubt many of you on the call are investor members, but for those of you who are not, there's information about investor membership on our website, and I'll circulate that link at the end of this. And the is data accessible by investor members. So being a member is a prerequisite. Your login details, access to your membership. So if you have any trouble with the login or linking your account to the data, then send an email to admin@gresb.com, and we'll make sure that you're set up. So with that being said, Charles, over to take us through the portal.
Thank you, Claudia. So as mentioned earlier, so I'm part of the real estate team, and I'll be delivering. It's a pleasure to deliver this webinar to you today. According to this following structure, so we start off by having a look at the coverage. So what are the entities that you have access to the data of as an investor member? And you'll see that there is a distinction that needs to be done between listed investor members and non-listed investor members. And after that, we'll deep dive into the key ways for you to look at ESG data through our portal, whether it relates to entities specifically, such as benchmark reports, but we also have features that allows you to look at ESG performance data on an aggregate basis, such as the portfolio analysis tool or the data downloader. And as mentioned earlier, we'll give ourselves a few minutes to address the questions that you would have, but it doesn't need to be necessarily at the end. It can be throughout the presentation. That's completely fine. And I believe the best way really to show you how the portal works is to simply impersonate an existing user and show you how what the pages look like. So this is the portal this is what the portal looks like once you're connected as an investor member. In this case, it's a dummy account. So all the data you will see as part of this presentation are dummy. So there's nothing real, but the pages look exactly the same. And we'll be spending most of our time on these two tabs here, reports and analysis, for the simple reason that assessment portal tabs is specifically designed for the GRESB respondents, so the participants who spend a lot of time and energy to provide us with their data during the assessment completion period between April and July. And I mean, you can still have access to this page to see what it feels like to complete an assessment, but it's probably not as relevant as the two other tabs for you. So moving on to the next tab, reports, which is essentially gives you an overview of your coverage. So what entities you have access to. So it really shows you who, as an investor, you have access to the data of, or potentially can request access of. And as you can see, this page is divided into two, or I would say three main buttons, but the two main buttons are, the two first one are more important than the third one. Benchmark reports and available company and funds. The benchmark reports tab shows you what is your current coverage. So what companies you can currently access to. And as a listed investor, you will instantly receive access to all the listed real estate companies reporting to GRESB. As a non-listed investor, this tab will initially be empty, but you can start populating this tab by requesting access to the account manager of these very entities. Assuming that these account managers would grant you with the access, then that tab would be populated with the information that you want to look at here. So, in other words, as a listed investor, you will have all the listed companies here, right? As a non-listed investor, this will be empty at the beginning, but then the second tab shows you all the companies that you are able to request access to. So, for example, if I want to do a mock one with you, I am a non-listed investor and I would like to request access to entity 11509 here. I'm just going to click on request access. And this will make appear a notification on the other side of the portal, on the asset manager side or on the account manager of that entity, who will receive a notification saying investor XYZ would like to request access to my ESG performance data. Am I granting access or am I denying? And assuming the access is granted, as I said earlier, the benchmark report here will be switched to the first tab. You can also follow up on your pending request using the third tab here. As you can see, I've got 5 pending requests. So now that we've better understood the coverage, let's have a look at what kind of information we're talking about. What is a benchmark report actually? So let me open, let's say, a random benchmark report here, for example, 4118. I'm just going to click on it. You can see that this company reported to GRESB from 2012 to 2018 on a consistent basis. And I'm going to simply open the benchmark report by clicking the 2018 button. Right, so that's what benchmark report looks like. There's a lot of metrics out there, a lot of figures you might not be familiar with yet. So in a few words, what is a benchmark report? Essentially, a benchmark report is the outcome, is the results of all the data, self-reported data straight from the participants into our system. And all these data, whether we're talking about qualitative data or quantitative data, will go through our validation layers. So qualitative data, such as policy and documents, will be reviewed manually by us, and the quantitative data will go through statistical checks in order for us to identify potential outliers and to reject potentially wrong values. And so all this data being cleaned up we'll be applying on that data our scoring model and our benchmarking tool in order to come up with all these metrics that you can see at the top of the page right now. So let's have a quick skim through the main metrics so you know what they mean and where they come from. We're not going to be able to go through all of them because there are lots, but I really recommend you to take the time to go through that and to really understand how it works. So the first one I'd like to start with is the 85 here, which is essentially the score of that company called 9683. Again, a dummy company in this case, which is simply the sum of all the points that the company managed to collect throughout the completion of the assessment, as shown as a percentage. That's out of 100. And this figure is directly linked to the number of stars that the company received. In this case, 5 stars. You can see that all the stars are green, which the number of stars, in other words, show show the division of the entire GRESB population into 5 buckets of the same size, being quintiles. And so, in other words, if the company receives 5 stars, it means that the company is among the top 20% of the entire GRESB population. You will also notice that the company is part of a peer group, here, in this case, Office in Australia, which allows us to compare that company with, with similar entities.
Oh, actually, Charles,
Yeah.
Before you go on, I can see a question here that's come in. I think a person's seeing, actually, if you scroll up a little bit, I think a person's looking at Office in Australia, and they just want a little bit more on that. How are peer groups constructed is the question.
Sure. So it's actually a good question because we often receive similar questions on the peer group and the logic for us to construct peer groups. So basically, the 3 main criteria that we consider when it comes to create peer groups are the property types of the fund, of the assets owned by the funds or company, the regions or country where that company operates from, and its status, whether it's a listed company or a private company/fund. So in this case, you can see that the peer group of the company is Office Australia. It means that the main property type of the company is office, and the threshold we use is 75% in this case. So it means that more than 75% of all the assets owned by the company reported to GRESB are office buildings. Pretty much the same logic applies to the region with a threshold of 60%. So it means that if 60% or above the assets of the company are in a specific country, then the country will be determining the peer group. In this case, 60% or above, that company 9683 are based in Australia. A last word on the peer group. So some of the companies might also be diversified, which means that we haven't been able to find a property type that makes up 75% or more that the entire portfolio of using one property type. So we've had to combine at least 2 property types, and that's why some companies fall under peer groups such as diversified office retail. This is an example where we had to combine these 2 to come up with 75% and above. So if I keep going, you can see that the score of the company can also be seen from different angles, from implementation and measurement or management policy, which essentially reflect the axis of the GRESB model underneath. Implementation and measurement mainly referring to indicators, quantitative indicators relating to the buildings, to the assets, whereas management policy will mainly make reference to qualitative indicators such as internal policies or level of implication of management in the day-to-day management of ESG, etc. You also have your score from an ESG pillar breakdown, respectively environment, social, and governance. And then you have, finally, if I keep scrolling down, this is a lot of metrics. This is also, score per aspect, for example, aspects being thematics that we use. A lot of quantitative metrics coming from the performance indicators aspect. And finally, the last thing I wanted to touch on is the actual indicators as well. So on top of all these metrics, you can see that you have the breakdown per indicator of each indicator responded by the participants. So in this case, for example, the participants received 2 points out of 2 for MA1, saying that, and MA1 is covering, whether the company has ESG objectives. The company said, yes, we have ESG objectives covering these topics here. And we believe that our ESG objectives are fully integrated with the business strategy. And we've got some, supporting evidence to support our answer. And these documents, in this case, you can see dummy websites, but these documents uploaded will go through our validation layers and will be, in order to be deemed to be satisfactory to support and to receive the points. Right, that was really the benchmark reports. Again, the most detailed way to receive ESG information and to receive information on ESG performance at the company level. So now, let me switch on to the analysis tab that will allow us to really look at the same kind of information, but on an aggregate basis. So the first thing I'd like to share with you is our portfolio analysis tool, which is a way that you can use a tool that you can use to create any tailored analysis to look at your ESG performance on an aggregated basis. So I think the best way to do it is to simply do it just do one together, and you see it's pretty easy to use. So let me click on create a new 2018 analysis that I'm going to call investor webinar. And the first page allows you to select the companies that you'd like to include in your analysis. And so as a listed investor, you'll have access to all the listed companies reporting to GRESB. As a non-listed, you have access to all the non-listed companies reporting to GRESB, assuming that these companies would have granted you with access beforehand. So in this case, for example, I'd like to make up analysis of, let's say, all the listed companies that are based in Europe. So I'm simply going to select these filters, update results, and this button at the top allows me to select all companies all at once. So you can see that number amounts to 67. So 67 companies reported to GRESB in 2018 were listed and operating from Europe. Next step would be to allocate the weights to each company within the analysis. So you can either allocate an equal weight. So I want all my companies to be weighting the same, or alternatively, I can also would like to allocate weight based on the gross asset value, in the sense that I want I want the big companies to weight more than the small companies. So let's go for the equally weight for the sake of this example. But this is simply the two options available. You can also manually input your weights if you believe that the gross asset value is not representing what you are looking for. Next step is a very interesting step here, and that's where the whole market intelligence lies in this portfolio analysis tool, is to define the benchmark you want to be comparing your analysis against. So if you remember, I selected all the listed European companies. I would like to compare these companies, let's say, to all the listed companies worldwide, regardless of the region. So I'm going to go to legal status, select all the listed, and I'm going to go to region and select all the regions. And as you can see, the number of entities, the total number of entities in that benchmark is 207. Yeah, that gives you a split-ish about the number of entities, listed entities in Europe and outside Europe. And you can do that for any kind of region, of course. And if I click on next step, that's going to generate the actual analysis. And as you can see, as you will see, the various metrics that you will be able to see on the screen will be showing the exact same metrics as the metrics that we've covered together on the benchmark reports, but this time on an aggregate basis. And that's where it's becoming interesting. And also that page also gives you the same metrics, but for your benchmark group that you would have defined yourself beforehand. So I'm not going to talk about this because we've covered that in the benchmark report, but the exact same logic applies here. The 70 essentially is the average score of all the European entities operating in Europe. What you can also notice is that there is a list of companies here that are composing your analysis.
Actually, Charles, can I interrupt you there a second? Because
Sure.
I see a question that I think relates to this portfolio analysis tool, or I think you can answer it here on this page. And the question is, how can I see how different managers are performing in order to identify candidates for engagement? I think we can answer that here, can't we? Yeah, definitely. That's a great question, actually, because it shows some proactivity in the audience. That's really nice. So I was actually just going through this list of companies here that are composing your analysis. And if you remember, there was 67 lines, and they're all classified by absolute score, right? So you can see absolute score 93, 92, 92, 90, and you can really see what are the leaders within your group, as well as the laggards, or the lowest performers, I would say.
And you've got two ways really to engage and to improve your ESG performance. You can either you engage with the bottom of the bucket, I would say. So you go at the bottom, you say, oh, by the way, do you know why your ESG performance are so low this year? And what you could do to improve yourself through the years. So that's really an engagement tool. But also to show even more proactivity, you could also engage with the top of the list to actually understand how these companies manage to achieve these scores. And that would be a good way for you to isolate these best practices and to share that with potentially with your investees so they can really improve over time. So that's really a nice way to look at it. And I guess the last thing I'd like to add, and it's not something you necessarily see on this screen, but it's also a clever way to engage with your investees, is that you can create the same analysis, but for the year before, even for 2016 if you want, for let's say 3 years in a row. And you can compare the list of companies with their respective app score over time. So you can see that which companies actually improved the most over time, and which companies decreased the most over time. And that's really also a way to engage with them to say, okay, I can see that you perform really well over time. What is your strategy and how do you manage to do that? And you also want to engage with the, with the ones having seen their score decrease on the same topics. And the last thing of this portfolio analysis is to simply show you, as you can see, the same metrics here coming straight away coming from the performance indicators. You also have a breakdown per indicator here, again on an aggregate basis. That's not just company specific, but that's looking at the 67 company all at once with the benchmark and the global comparison. Right, a little note on infrastructure investors here, because this is a real estate portfolio analysis tool. But if you are an investor, an infrastructure investor, sorry, the benchmark report of a fund, you'll be able to access the benchmark reports either of a fund or of an asset. And if you have access to a fund, then the fund will actually be will include the list of all the assets associated to it, and you'll be able to access the benchmark report of these assets, assuming again the same logic as before, assuming you would have secured the access to beforehand. But you can actually see the score of the fund, but also the score of the fund along with the assets together on an aggregate basis.
And yeah, just one other note about infrastructure. I see there's a question that's come in about peer grouping on infrastructure. Charles, I'm sure you could answer it, but what I've done is I've asked Rick Walters to come in. He'll come in about 5 minutes to answer that question, or any other infrastructure questions that anyone has. Please send them in, because we'll have Rick Walters, the Director of Infrastructure, coming in about 5 minutes to tackle those. Thanks.
That's great. That's great that Rick is coming. And so now that we've covered the portfolio analysis tool, which is really embedded in our portal, I also would like to share with you the last way to really look at ESG performance, and it's probably the way maybe financial analysts we prefer, because we know they really like to play around and they like to keep their flexibility. If I go back to the analysis tab, you see there is a download button here, and if I click on this, that will lead me to a page where I can download a file actually. So I'm not going to download this because the underlying file is not anonymized, but I've got the exact same file on my computer that has been anonymized beforehand. So let me open this file and show you what it looks like. Right, so this is the file that I was just mentioning earlier, showing essentially all the metrics that we've covered together, the metrics from the benchmark report, also from the portfolio analysis tool, in Excel. That really gives you the flexibility to navigate and to interrogate any variable that you're interested in. Each row represents one company, and you've got all the metrics in all these columns. And to make the analysis in the understanding of that Excel spreadsheet clearer, we've also used a guide. We've got one guide for real estate, but also one guide for infrastructure that defines and clarifies the meaning of each variable. So I've got this guide with me, which is also downloadable from the portal, and it looks like this. So you've got the variable name, which exactly match the name of the variables here in the columns. The definition of the variable, so you can understand what exactly it means, and then in some instances, the possible values of these variables. So let's make it clear. If I'm taking the cat PRT, I can see that that means the predominant property type of the entity. I'm looking for the cat PRT. There is no cat PRT. So the first tab here, the first line here, for example, shows a company that has a cat PRT. So the predominant property type of 4. What does 4 mean? Well, the guy tells me that 4 means residential. It means that the company is operating, has more than 75% of its asset as residential. And that's really the way. The reason why we've done that is to keep the spreadsheet. Not to overcrowd the spreadsheet with too much and too lengthy information. To keep it as light as possible. As you can see, there is already a lot of columns. So my colleague Rick from the infrastructure department here just joined us to answer this very specific question on infrastructure. So let me hang on the mic to him.
Yeah. So Rick, the question is, are the peer grouping criteria the same across infrastructure and real estate? So a bit of insight into the peer groupings that you have for infrastructure would be really useful.
Sure. Thanks, Claudia. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Rick Walters. I'm the Director for Infrastructure at GRESB. Just to answer the question then, and I'm happy to answer any others that are pertinent to infrastructure. The peer grouping is very similar for infrastructure to real estate, and Charles explained the peer grouping, I'm sure. The key kind of process is it follows the same kind of process of looking at different categories first, but with infra, what we first look at is the contract model. So we look at whether whether the asset is private or PPP or government or listed, and that will be the first thing we looked at for peer group. So if the entity is PPP, that will determine which peer group it goes in as the first priority. Then we look at the sector, a bit like the property types in real estate. We next look at sector. So we look at, is it a solar farm? And if there's enough other solar farms in that category, then that will form the peer group. We keep going up sector until we find enough. So if there's not enough solar farms in that particular country, then we keep going up. So basically, we keep moving along those categories. We go first, contract model, second, sector, and lastly, geography. So the way we do it, we're looking for contract model first, then sector, say solar farm, and then country, region, globe. So take you through that example again. If it's a private 100% owned solar farm, and there's enough in the peer group for the country, say the UK, then that will be the peer group. If there's not enough in the UK, then it will move up to the next category being, say, British Isles or Europe. And if there's enough in that peer group, that will form the category. If there's still not enough, it goes up to globe. And if there's still not enough solar farms, then it goes up to the next category in the sectors. So it'll go to renewable energy. Mm-hmm. So very similar to real estate, just a slightly different breakdown and with the contract model first.
Thanks very much, Rick.
Very clear, yeah. Thank you.
So I can see actually another question coming in, Charles, and I thought I'd pick this up now because it refers to something, probably a screen that you were covering earlier. The question is Charles here referring to companies as organizations or as individual vehicles? So if you could answer that, that would be great.
Sure. So I suppose that question was referring to the lines that I was selecting as part of my portfolio analysis. So there's a line relate to a company or an SPV or what kind of legal entity are we talking about? So in this case, we've got some rules in order to define what defines a GRESB participants or a GRESB reporting entity specifically. It can refer to listed companies. It can refer to a fund. That's really what we say in our guidance is really legal entity. It needs to be a legal entity. And one of the first indicators that is actually available in a benchmark report is the boundaries of the portfolio reported to GRESB. And that really clarifies what are we talking about. So we tend to, I mean, technically companies should be reporting 100% of the portfolio, but sometimes we are aware that within the structure of the company you may have a listed company at the top and some special purpose vehicle at the underneath. So that's really defined by these indicators at the very top of the questionnaire that gives clarity to any reader, specifically to investors, about what we're talking about, what's how many buildings are we looking at, and where is it based. So I hope that answers the question.
So we have another question here, Charles, and I was kind of expecting this one because it's about carbon footprinting and calculating carbon footprinting. But the question is specifically, what's the best tool to enable me to do that? And the reference is the benchmark report, the portfolio tool, or the Excel spreadsheet. And I think by the Excel spreadsheet, you mean the data downloader. So if you could sort of just help us work out what's the best tool to use to calculate the carbon footprint, that would be really useful.
Yeah, definitely. That's a question also we get often, so it makes sense that it comes out now. So if we want to look at the carbon footprint of a company individually, so not at portfolio level, I believe the best way is really to look at the benchmark report, because that really includes everything on that company. So that's I just went back to the benchmark report of the same company we looked at together earlier. If I scroll down and I arrive at the at the metrics section, you can see that there is a section energy consumption or GHG emission underneath the footprint 2017. And that really shows that amount here is really showing the carbon footprint of the company in 2017. That relates to the coverage that participant reported to us, right? So, for example, in this case, we can see that the portfolio coverage is only 82%. So we know that we're not covering 100% of all the area, across all the buildings, all the assets of that company. So we know that, at a level of 82%, we know that the carbon footprint of that company amounts to 51,000 tons of CO2. If you want now to calculate the carbon footprint of a portfolio, I would personally not recommend to use the portfolio analysis tool, because that really gives you simply the sum of the carbon footprint of all the constituents of that analysis. I would rather recommend to use the Excel spreadsheet, where let me go back to the Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, where one of the variables is simply total GHG emission current year, and I think this variable is somewhere here. GHG absolute coverage is this. I think this is the one. GHG absolute ton current year. Again, refer to the guide, the real estate guide, that will really match you. That will really explain what the variable means. But if you simply take these figures for the companies that you're owning, for example, to which you multiply by the weight that you want, for example, your percentage of ownership in these companies to reflect your financial structure of your company, then you can simply quite straightforwardly calculate the carbon footprint of your portfolio.
Excellent. So we're now formally in the question and answer section of this webinar, and it's great to have more of these come in, and I can see a few more that we'll tackle now. And actually, there's another infra one, Rick. Here it is. It's how long on average does it take for an infra fund manager to input all the data required for an asset or fund to be able to be evaluated by GRESB?
Sure, and this is not so relevant, I guess, to the webinar and the investor analysis, but nevertheless happy to answer, of course, because you as investors may get asked by your investments, your funds and assets, and so you need a good answer for that. So the broad answer is, of course, how long's a piece of string? But what I can say is it depends on a number of factors, which is how much data you've got at your fingertips, or the manager has at their fingertips, how complex the organization is, how prepared are they, what their understanding of ESG is, how mature the company or the organization is in terms of managing ESG. But taking all those things into account, if it's your first time, it's a lot harder. It takes more work. There's no pre-filling from the previous year. But again, taking all those things into account, it can range a lot from maybe a few days FTE right up to weeks of FTE effort. So I know that's a pretty big range, but that's typically what we see. First year, a lot more effort. Subsequent years, because of pre-filling and because of experience and building of capacity, much easier. But there'll be more on this. I would certainly encourage anyone interested in understanding this sort of thing better to get more involved in the training next year in the lead up to participation. That's where we cover all of this sort of stuff in much more detail and help people to prepare to participate.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick, for that.
Oh, one other quick
one
thing.
More thing.
One of the quick things, sorry, is the fund and the asset assessment are quite different in this regard. The fund is only 11 indicators. It's pretty high-level summary sort of information. So much less effort to complete the fund assessment. So again, an organised fund manager, with everything at their fingertips, might be able to do that in a day for a fund, whereas someone new might take a bit longer. The asset is definitely more complex and more detailed, 39 indicators, for example.
Great. Thanks for that, Rick. So I can see 2 more questions in the Q&A, so please add in any more if you have any. So this question, Charles, I think I'll direct to you. It's a forward-looking question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, does GRESB have plans to eventually be able to use the tool to benchmark individual real estate assets from a performance perspective?
I'm actually very happy to read that question because there was actually the main, amongst the main topics that we've covered as part of our result launch events, roadshows, starting September and ending last week almost. So essentially, we've been starting to collect asset level information in 2017, and we've drastically increased the size of our asset level database in 2018 by introducing a scoring incentive to report at asset level. And so we managed to reach an amount of asset level covered as part of our assessment in 2018 of 50,000. That was way above all expectations. That was a great news. And our intentions, of course, going forward would be to keep increasing the size of the database in order to refine our analysis, the values we calculate, the averages that we come up with, and as we keep collecting information at asset level, we'll also be able to start geolocating these assets to be able to really refine every piece of information that comes out from our analysis. And our wish is, of course, to bring back all these values, this information, under a format of market intelligence to the real estate industry. We're talking about investor side or management side. Yes, this is obviously part of our intention.
Thanks, Charles. And actually we've got a couple more questions again. This question's about the Excel spreadsheet. So back to you, Charles. And the question is, it's basically a little bit unclear in terms of the column headings. So what I wonder is, there was that guide that you referred to that explains what the variable names are. Perhaps you could just show where that appears on the portal, because I think if that can be downloaded, and then that explains what the headings are. I believe
either it's a matter of variable name, but I'm reading the question. I think it seems to be the format of the spreadsheet that is being downloaded, and I think it's part of the settings of my computer. For example, when I'm downloading the spreadsheet, it's showing the way I'm actually showing it to you right now. So this is exactly how it looks like, what it looks like. Sorry, except that I've hidden the names, but this is what it looks like. I think some people are experiencing the same issue in a way as you. You're downloading a spreadsheet where all the variables are next to each other in the very first column. And that's just a simple Excel manipulation to come up with to split that. And I'm happy to take that offline because that's a bit technical right now. But I'm happy to liaise with that person to explain how it works, because I've done that a few times.
Okay, great. So we have one more question, and this is one that kind of goes at the heart of GRESB. And actually, maybe this is something that I can take, because the question is, how can I incentivize my managers to report to GRESB? And as I said, this is something that GRESB wants to encourage, and we've created a resource. And actually, Charles, can you go to the investor guidance landing page? Can you find that on your?
Yes, I can do that. So I can show with everyone the page.
Yeah, that would be great, because on the page there are a couple of things that I want to show. There's some resources. Oh yeah, there we go. There's some general resources. So, for example, a lot of what Charles has just covered is also included here as a downloadable PDF, a portal guide for members. There's also an engagement guide. But in terms of the specific questions about sort of incentivizing or encouraging participation, we've produced a series of letters that you can download. They're really just starter texts, just to kind of help the process along and make your engagement and communication as simple as possible. So this page, I'll share this at the end of the call in case you can't find it. And this section here just shows a series of letters that you can download and use to start the conversation to encourage your managers to participate.
Is there any more questions?
Sorry, Chris, go on, Rick. I think you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I was going to say also some investors actually mandate the use of GRESB. So, there's quite a few that are basically saying, and this is obviously where you get to when you've been on the journey for a while, they won't invest in those managers unless they will report to GRESB every year. So that's the extent of where you can go to, and you've got to decide, I guess, whether you're ready for that. But that's actually a really strong indication that really drives the market.
Excellent. So just looking, there's one more question. Oh no, that's to be contacted offline.
Yeah, that's fine. And I know that you are just down, so let's keep in touch.
Okay, so yeah, we're at the 45-minute mark, which is actually perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
A 30-minute demo and 15 minutes for a Q&A, but we sort of mixed them all together. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. We'll send an email around, as I said, with some more resources, and we'll also be sending the recording of this round. Thank you very much for participating live, and yeah, we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.